At the start of the 20th century, black leaders criticized the program of Booker T. Washington. Too compromising, they said. Too slow. What whites want to hear, not what blacks want to follow. A fiery black newspaper editor named Monroe Trotter was a leading critic of Washington's approach. In his newspaper, the Boston Guardian, Trotter urged blacks to resist Washington's leadership.
The Trotter position: independent black political action and separate black organizations. The Trotter message: don't count on whites for help. He followed Washington around from city to city, challenging and questioning his philosophy of accommodation. Trotter stated his goals for his people.
In detail, our demands are clear and unequivocal. First, we would vote. With the right to vote goes everything. We want full manhood suffrage, and we want it now, henceforth, and forever. Second, we want discrimination in public accommodations to cease. Third, we claim the right of freemen to walk, talk, and be with them that wish to be with us. Fourth, we want the laws enforced against the rich as well as the poor, against capitalist as well as laborer, against white as well as black. Fifth, we want our children educated.
Of all the blacks who opposed Washington, the most famous was W.E.B. Du Bois. Educated at Harvard and in Europe, Du Bois had, at first, agreed with most of Washington's views. But as the 20th century got underway, Du Bois saw that Washington's program was not stopping racism and discrimination.
Du Bois did not believe the black man could get justice by pleasing the white man. In 1905, Du Bois and a group of concerned blacks and whites founded the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People.
Du Bois criticized Washington's educational philosophy. Too limited, said Du Bois.
In education, we must seek to give colored children free public school training. We must watch with grave suspicion the attempt of those who, under the guise of vocational training, would fasten ignorance and menial service on the Negro for another generation. Our children must not in large numbers be forced into the servant class.
NAACP critics called that organization too tame and said its emphasis on constitutional rights did not speak to the needs of the millions of poor blacks. Two leading NAACP critics were A. Philip Randolph and Chandler Owen, editors of a monthly magazine, The Messenger, which called itself the only radical Negro magazine in America. In editorials, the two men pushed for solidarity between black and white workers. The enemy, they said, was not the white man, but the white businessman who exploited poor white and poor blacks alike.
The history of the labor movement in America proves that the employing class recognize no race lines. They will exploit a white man as readily as a black man. They will exploit women as readily as men. They will even go to the extent of coining the labor, blood, and suffering of children into dollars. Capitalists are only concerned with profit, and they will exploit any race or class in order to make profit. The combination of black and white workers will show that labor, black and white, is conscious of its interest and power.
Randolph and Owen were radical, but many blacks believed that they were not radical enough. Their critics contended that solidarity of whites and blacks was not the answer. The white man had always betrayed black men, and there was no reason to believe this would change. The man who most clearly stated these ideas was Marcus Garvey. Jamaican-born, Garvey came to Harlem in 1916. At this time, hundreds of thousands of blacks were moving out of the South and into northern cities. In 1919, there were 26 race riots begun by whites against blacks. Amidst these conditions, Marcus Garvey preached black pride and a return to Africa to his people.
When Europe was inhabited by a race of cannibals, a race of savages, naked men, heathens, and pagans, Africa was peopled by a race of cultured men who were masters in art, science, and literature. Why then should you lose hope? Black men, you were once great. You shall be great again. Lose not your courage. Lose not faith. Go forward.
Garvey's solution to the black man's problem was power, and he did not believe the black man would ever gain power in white America.
Power. If we must have justice, we must be strong. If we must be strong, we must come together. We must do so through a system of organization. The ultimate goal is to return to Africa. Do they lynch Englishmen, Frenchmen, Germans, or Japanese? No. And why? Because these people are represented by great governments, mighty nations and empires strongly organized. Until the Negro reaches this point of national independence, all he does as a race will count for naught.
Garvey's Back to Africa movement was rejected by the majority of blacks. They were black Americans, determined to achieve freedom in their own land. Such a man was Roy Wilkins. Wilkins came up through the ranks of the NAACP, becoming its executive secretary in 1950. He spoke for most blacks who were determined to battle into full citizenship legally.
For Wilkins, the battle for black rights was an aggressive fight, but a peaceful fight. Other, more violent approaches captured headlines, but Wilkins held his ground and the respect of millions.
I've never been motivated by any persistent, strong feelings against white people. I may be an incurable optimist, but I believe there are more people who want to do good than do evil. Negroes want in the American society, and they want the ways open now. They reject separation, whether advocated by the black Muslims, the White Citizens Council, or the Communist Party. They are committed to a pluralistic society with equal rights, opportunities, and freedom for all.
In the 1960s, the use of violence in the black struggle became a widespread topic of discussion. Robert Williams was a black ex-Marine who returned home to Monroe, North Carolina, to become president of the local NAACP. When the Ku Klux Klan attacked his organization, Williams and his followers picked up guns to protect themselves. In his book, Negroes with Guns, Williams set out his philosophy of armed self-defense.
Equality, total equality, must grant the black citizens the same right to be a devil or a god as the whites. It must grant him the same right of temper and the same right of self-defense as any other citizen. The power of nonviolence and love is a farce. Socrates was nonviolent, and he too stressed love. He died at the hands of violent men. Christ was nonviolent, and he too stressed love and nonviolence. He too died a violent death. History is replete with examples of nonviolent men as well as violent ones who died from the power of violence, either justified or unjustified.
Williams cautioned blacks against using violence to take revenge.
Afro-Americans must remember that a campaign of massive self-defense cannot be a campaign for vengeance, however sweet and deserving vengeance may be. Such a campaign of self-defense and survival must be based on the righteous cause of justice. It must not be anti-white, but anti-oppression and injustice. Uncle Tom's should be as much a target as racist whites.
Williams' opponents accused him of wanting to destroy the American government. He answered,
"We do not advocate the violent overthrow of the United States government. We merely advocate self-defense for brutalized Afro-Americans. But the oppressor's heart is hard. The experience of history teaches that he only relents under violent pressure and force. There is very little hope that he will see the handwriting on the wall before it is too late."
Resisting the call to violence was Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., who came to be known as the apostle of nonviolence. Violence spoke to a small minority of blacks. Dr. King spoke to all, black and white.
It seems to me that nonviolent resistance is the method that must guide the actions of the Negro in the present crisis in race relations. The Negro must work passionately and unrelentingly for full stature as a citizen, but he must not use inferior methods to gain it. The way of nonviolence means a willingness to suffer and sacrifice. It may mean going to jail. If such is the case, the resistor must be willing to feel the jailhouses. It may even mean physical death. But if physical death is the price that a man must pay to free his children and his white brethren from a permanent death of the spirit, nothing could be more redemptive.
Violence versus nonviolence was not the only black issue in the 1960s. The question of separation versus integration once again came into the headlines. In March 1962, the issue was debated before a mainly white audience at Cornell University.
Speaking for separation was Malcolm X, at that time chief spokesman for the black Muslims. In the midst of the growing civil rights movement, Malcolm X spoke for those blacks who saw little progress and no hope in America.
America preaches one thing and practices another. And we don't want to integrate with hypocrites who preach one thing and practice another. Instead of asking or seeking to integrate into the American society, we want to face the facts of the problem the way they are and separate ourselves. And in separating ourselves, this doesn't mean that we are anti-white or anti-American or anti-anything. We feel that if integration all these years haven't solved the problem yet, then we want to try something new, something different, and something that is in accord with the conditions as they actually exist.
Speaking for integration was James Farmer, head of the Congress on Racial Equality, known as CORE. CORE had started out in the early 1940s as a mainly white civil rights group dedicated to nonviolent direct action to solve America's race problems. At the time of this debate in 1962, CORE was becoming a black-led, black-staffed organization, still devoted to integration. Farmer spoke for blacks who were determined to participate in American society.
What are our objectives? Segregation? Separation? Absolutely not. The disease and the evils that we have pointed to in our American culture have grown out of segregation and its partner, prejudice. We are for integration, which is the repudiation of the evil of segregation. Our objective is to have each individual accepted on the basis of his individual merit and not on the basis of his color, on the basis of what he is worth himself.
Malcolm X later began to reshape his attitude to America and the black-white relationship. He recognized that the black man would have to fight for recognition as part and parcel of the American community, and he recognized that not all whites were enemies.
Now I know it's smarter to say you're going to shoot a man for what he is doing to you than because he's white. If you attack him because he is white, you give him no out. He can't stop being white. You've got to give the man a chance. He probably won't take it, the snake, but we've got to give him a chance.
Black nationalism slowly faded from the headlines, and another, stronger phrase took its place: black power. Stokely Carmichael, the young dynamic leader of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, better known as SNCC, first shouted the phrase. Later, he explained what he meant by it.
Black power does not involve racial hatred and racial separatism. It can be clearly defined. We should begin with the basic fact that black Americans have two problems. They are poor and they are black. Any program to end racism must address itself to that double identity. Black people must do things for themselves. They must get poverty money they will control and spend themselves. They must conduct tutorial programs themselves so that black children can identify with black people. This does not mean that we don't welcome help or friends, but we want the right to decide whether anyone is in fact our friend.
Black people must do things for themselves, Carmichael said. As the 1960s moved on, this became the most powerful theme in the black struggle. Integrated civil rights action was on the way out, as blacks told whites, "We'll work with our people. If you're sincere, you'll go out and work with yours." CORE lost most of its white members as it entered a new phase of militant black political action. So did SNCC, and in the wake of the explosion in Watts in the summer of 1965, a new black organization emerged, the Black Panthers.
The Panthers aimed to protect blacks from abuse at the hands of white policemen. They carried guns openly, and they were determined to unite poor blacks into a tough, strong political force. One of their most eloquent spokesmen was Elridge Cleaver, a tall, bearded, self-educated man who had spent 9 years in prison. In an interview, Cleaver described the Panthers' program.
We are not willing to accept the rules of the white establishment. We want freedom. We want power to determine the destiny of our black community. We want full employment for our people, housing fit for the shelter of human beings. We want all black men to be exempt from military service. We want decent education for black people, education that teaches us the true nature of this decadent, racist society, and that teaches young black brothers and sisters of their rightful place in society. For if they don't know their place in society and the world, they can't relate to anything else.
In April 1968, Martin Luther King was shot and killed. For many young blacks, this marked the end of the nonviolent movement. 2 days after King's death, Eldridge Cleaver wrote these words:
"The assassin's bullet which struck down Dr. King closed a door that to the majority of black people seemed closed long ago. To many of us, it was clear that that door had never been opened. We were willing to allow the hopeful others to bang upon the door for entry. We were willing to sit back and let them do this. Indeed, we had no other choice. But now all black people in America have become Black Panthers in spirit. People will look back upon Dr. King and upon his successors with something of the emotion one feels when one looks upon the corpse of a loved one. But it is all dead now. It's all dead now. Now there is the gun and the bomb, dynamite and the knife, and they will be used liberally in America. America will bleed. America will suffer."
Many listened to Cleaver and shuddered at his grim prophecy. Others remembered that his words had been uttered many times before by men like David Walker, as far back as 1829, by Nat Turner, Henry Highland Garnett, and a reporter named John Bruce. Men who spoke for their people in the century before Cleaver was born. In his own time, Cleaver echoed the thoughts of Malcolm X, Robert Williams, Stokely Carmichael, blacks who could no longer believe the promises white America made with ease and broke with even greater ease.
Those blacks who could not accept Cleaver's vision of the future clung to the hope and love of Martin Luther King. They remembered the struggle of Frederick Douglass, the brilliance of black Reconstruction lawmakers like Benjamin Cardozo, the lifelong work of Booker T. Washington, blacks who were convinced that white America could be won over to the side of freedom and equality.
What is the black position now? It cannot be neatly defined, although it is tempting to do so. Some black leaders, as these records have shown, believe in revolution, some in assimilation, some in radical integration, some in separatism, some in immigration. But black leaders, like the people they represent, let events and experience change their views.
The dream of a nation where black and white can like or dislike each other because it's no longer that important among equals is still a dream. But it's no longer an impossible dream, for reasons made clear by one of the most lyrical of black spokesmen, novelist James Baldwin. "I know that what I'm asking is impossible," Baldwin wrote, "but in our time, as in every time, the impossible is the least that one can demand, and one is, after all, emboldened by the spectacle of human history in general and American Negro history in particular, for it testifies to nothing less than the perpetual achievement of the impossible."